Well, thank you. It's time to open it up to the floor for questions.
Hi, so I'm one of those like maligned educators who was initially resistant and then was converted by a reluctant reader, and now actually read a number of graphic novels myself. But I think part of the hesitation comes from, I went to college relatively recently and majored in literature, and no one taught us how to read graphic novels right in college. Like we read Mouse, that was like our one token graphic novel, and so now in trying to teach a graphic novel to children, I don't have the language, I don't have the background. I know how to teach a child to find a simile or a metaphor and figure out what it means, but I'm about to teach my first graphic novel to a group of kids, and I am nervous because I don't know what to draw their attention to. I don't know what an artist's choices are in a graphic novel. Like, I know it probably has to do with things like depth and shading and things like, but like what would you want to draw a child's attention to? What are the artistic choices that you feel like at least in the illustrations, that you think need to be noticed?
Can I just quickly plug a book that I have nothing to gain from? The name Scott McCloud, Understanding Comics, Making Comics. He started doing this 20 years ago, and it's become a Bible even for many creators who say, wow, I didn't know that. It's just a great, almost like a survey course, but he goes in depth. I also recommend Matt Madden and Jessica Abel are doing Making Comics books now. And it's inviting to read it both as text and picture, but it's really open. It's really accessible is a way in. And I hope you might be excited reading that and could pass that excitement on to your students.
Especially understanding comics. That's the key one.
Can I ask what grade and what book?
Middle school. And I teach in a school in Columbia Heights, which is more of an urban area. I'm teaching Fist, Stick, Knife, Gun, which is the story of Geoffrey Canada.
But can I just ask, is the administration at your school in general receptive, or is there pushback? What's the environment like for teaching graphic novels there?
I think it's more and more open, especially given the number of kids that we've seen completely go from not ever carrying books around to being attached at the hip to their bone book or their, it's just, it's converted a lot of people, but I think a lot of us still wonder how to teach it. So thank you for your suggestions.
Go to firstsecondbooks.com and look under teachers' resources. There's a lot there. There's some good stuff there, lesson plans and things that should help.
Thank you.
All strength.
Good work.
Did you?
I wonder if you could comment on why so many graphic novels are actually graphic memoirs, and what is it about the form that, leads to that?
That's a great question.
I think part of it is probably because of the indie comic scene, right? And there was for a while there was the superhero and the including the big publishers and the Archie and Richie Rich and that stuff, and then at a certain point the indie comic scene came up, and it had like a few geysers that popped up into America's notice, like Mouse. That came out of the indie comic scene, but then a lot of stuff was under the radar of most American readers, and part of the indie creed. The part of the indie creed was a rejection of editors and working on solo, artist, author projects, and a lot of that was a reaction to what DC and Marvel had turned editors into, which was basically the icy fingers of property control, and IP and all this kind of talk. So there was a reaction to it, which I think some people took too far and then became the purists of the indie comics, and they're like, if you use a colorist, you suck, and you're like, and I don't go in for that much. And then since then, I think from the indie, which still goes on, there's still a healthy indie comic scene, but there's also people who have kind of come into mainstream publishing in America with the graphic novel. And some of that, and I think some of the memoir thing has come from the indie. It's really the in your basement making your comic about real stuff, you know, and so it's not superheroes in capes and tights.
Good answer.
Yeah. What I would add too is, you have something like Mouse in the '80s, and then you have Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, and what I've experienced is you have once maligned educators, you have just adults in general, publishers. They say I can sell nonfiction because that's adult. So it may be pictures, but you're telling a story, and I can. It's if you say it's pictures and it's fiction, you're getting farther out on that limb. And I think if it's rooted in that, I think also sometimes to tell a memoir well is extremely difficult. I was just talking a couple days ago with a style writer at the Post, Neely Tucker. He said he wrote a book about an adoption of his child from Zimbabwe. And he said writing about yourself is one of the most indulgent things you can do. But I think it's also easier for a less talented writer to write a memoir because you know it. You can sell it as a topic. You can say this. If you can say this happened to me, it's an easier sell, but that doesn't mean they're good. But I think part of it is when you see these memoirs getting such acclaim and selling, I think it's like, okay, is that what the market is looking for? But like I say, with the explosion, I will say that we looked, judging the Eisners in San Diego 2 weeks ago, the memoir stacks were, towering over us, and less so with fiction graphic novels. So, yeah.
I remember reading a really interesting article by Umberto Eco. I don't know if any of you read it in the New York Review like 20 years ago. And he was talking about Crazy Cat and Peanuts, and talking about how comics can kind of, with a few characters, generate a universe. The idea of a hermeneutic kind of world, and I was thinking that some of the I'm not that well read in graphic novels, but some of the ones I like have a very existential kind of claustrophobic quality, and there's a way in which you feel like you're kind of confined. And I don't know if any of you love Crazy Cat, but I was thinking about Bone has a certain resonance with that, and there is something like about being on another world and yet having, because it's so spare and maybe because it's claustrophobic, having the sense of something also being kind of wide open and just very rich, So there is something kind of existential about that, I guess. But anyway, comments about it, and does anybody love Crazy Cat? Because after reading that, I picked up Crazy Cat, and I'm like, whoa. So I'd be just curious
Harriman
about
was a
thoughts.
genius, and I'd say Harriman, Sparky Schultz, and Jeff Smith with Bone. I mean, they, to me, all have that kind of genius. It's to make that world believable, especially with so few characters.
It's like a world instead of a story.
Absolutely. And about, 2 years before he died, I was sharing the same editor as Charles Schultz, and I asked him about that. And, I said, I know a few people think you should have a Pulitzer. Ted Geisel, Dr. Seuss has a Pulitzer. What you do, that world, what you were able to say. And he said, it'll never happen because people don't take comics that seriously. And it was interesting. And I wanted to say, we will. We'll catch up. And then to follow on that, Chris Ware, again, the Building Stories thing, I interviewed him recently, and I'm trying to illustrate this interview, but it is, he said, as a grown man, the only comic strip he grew up reading that felt so believable, the world, the emotion, that he still considers literature as a grown-up, is Peanuts. And here's one. He said when he was 9 years old, when Charlie Brown Christmas was on, he used to go up the line of speech and kiss the TV. And he says, and I still would do that if my child didn't look at me funny. But it's that to me, that's a kind of genius. Whether you're writing, if you can do it with prose and pictures, oh my gosh, yeah.
I especially, all the ones that you mentioned particularly, I think comics in general are good for this, but especially there's a certain sort of old comic where all the characters are pretty discreet and they tend to fit in the little panels. They're not the artist isn't acting, the panel isn't acting as like a camera where it like zooms in and out or changes angle. It just stays at one angle, and there's these little guys. And to me, I feel like when I read prose, and I love prose, I'm a big reader. It's like a magic spell that conjures visions in your mind. And comics don't do that. Because they exist, the characters really exist on the page, and they're real. They're physical little guys. Crazy Cat and all the
Ignatz and
right, and Crazy Crazy and Ignatz and all the Peanuts guys and Little Lulu. Those little drawings were the characters, and you could love them physically almost, the little guys on the paper. That's a really intense thing for me, at least.
It's like a racial memory going back to hieroglyphics.
But you notice that the Egyptians, though, had same face syndrome, evil. It was
Those buffalo and the cave paintings, they all look the same,
Did you want to? Yeah, please.
First, I want to say thank you guys for being here and sharing your wisdom. Beyond that, I run a startup animation studio, and a lot of the push that we do with our Facebook posts and everything, people wanted to get more of the characters, so we started doing graphic novels, and we just putting on Tumblr, Facebook, Twitter, and one of the things, it just seems cavernous because it's just, it's Facebook, it's Twitter. Even though we have our followers, is there any place, and I guess you guys would be sort of the gurus of this, any place in this new digital age where you can congregate and get more people that were looking for that? How do you deal with sort of the openness of the internet and trying to get your project seen?
One word: Tumblr.
Okay.
It's
okay.
phenomenal for artistic communities gather. They say Facebook is where your high school friends find you,
Yeah.
and Twitter is where people who want to snark about you find you, or you can snark about other people when you're not following celebrities' mindless thoughts. But Tumblr is an amazing. I mean, literally, I was talking to my daughter this morning. She posts her art there, and professional creators comment on. She has interactions with them on Tumblr because you see each other's work. And she said, "Oh yeah, Dad, I'm up to 1,000 followers. How many Twitter followers you have?" And the point is, Tumblr. It's amazing is a place where creative people are seeking out communities. It's just to name one.
I wish I knew too. What are the hashtags she's putting on her comics on Tumblr?
Thank you.
Really, what are the hashtags they're putting?
Anyone?
How old was your daughter? Is your daughter?
13 going on about 18.
Yeah, I think that I'm a little old for Tumblr. Tumblr is new and scary and confusing to me, so I'm trying my best. But it's definitely the internet's fast, super fast. So don't blame yourself for thinking it's confusing because it's really confusing.
Okay. One last question.
Hi guys. I wanted to ask a little about your process because I love graphic novels and I love both writing them and drawing them. But my problem is I have so many ideas and I'm so good at starting things, but finishing them is the worst thing. I've always thought I just need an editor or someone to tell me what to do and give me deadlines. But do you have any advice on making sure that you complete projects? Do you have someone pushing you? How do you finalize these wonderful works?
I work in a studio with 4 other cartoonists, and after grad school, where you have your peers in a classroom setting, that really was a nice transition to share a studio with other cartoonists. We show each other work. Sometimes we're too busy. We hand each other jobs, and I would surround yourself with a physical community, not just the internet, which can be vast, So I would definitely do that. And as far as my process, it's very traditional, it is a process actually, and that keeps me in line. I do if I get a book, I do all my thumbnails first, and then I go back and ink, and I do the word balloons, and I ink them, and I color it. It's very step by step and very slow, but that keeps it methodical, and I know what I have to do next. So, yeah.
I have to separate the drawing and the story because if I write it as I go, it'll just go forever. So to make sure the story's good and strong and tight, I write the whole thing as a typed document before I do the first drawing. And that way I know where I am as I go. And if there are things I want to add, I can kind of add them in. But if I go out without that roadmap of the story in place, it will do a lot of meandering.
This is, for me, I've just started writing shorter stories. Because the graphic novels are crazy time consuming and they're really hard to finish. It's something that, I just noticed with a lot of cartoonists that there's, they're steadily putting out shorter work, but then they're like, oh, I have this graphic novel, and, it just takes them forever. So you are not alone on that one either.
And Mark, you spent 9 years on that. So if you lived 109, you've spent a 10th year.
I mean, I'm thinking right now with the editor hat on is, there's really no one process that fits for everybody. There's certain things that seem to be consistently useful tips, and I found that as an editor, there's going to be 2 important conversations with an author or a team or whatever I'm working with, and there's or maybe 3, but there's 2 of them that I focus on. One is the early treatment, which is going to be a kind of a rough, simple synopsis usually, but not always. Sometimes it's something else, but it's like some kind of thing where you can look at the shape of the project. And I think what an editor is, at least for me, and this is not the model all editors use, but for me, an editor is someone who gives you distance from your own work. Now, if you're independently wealthy and you can do a Tolstoy and give like 25 years to your next project, go for it. You will have plenty of distance. But in our day and age, not many people can do that. So a good editor, or not just a good editor, but the right editor for you, like someone where the chemistry is right and the minds actually generate together, and they can kind of somehow step into your vision for the project. And that can happen. And I'm not always the best editor for everybody. Sometimes I have to find a freelance because I'm not the right person to do this project. But when it works, I'll have that first thing. And so I'm going to try and give you some distance from the initial, sense, the structure, the general. And it's usually about asking questions that you haven't asked yourself. And we all have our blind spots. So you need somebody, whether it's an editor, a friend, a studio mate, somebody's going to have to kind of shine a light on those blind spots, right? And that's the structure. Then what I do is, in terms of a publishing project, the other big conversation happens at thumbnails in one form or another. And some people have very readable, crisp, detailed thumbnails. Some people have like stick figure, like strange occult diagrams that nobody but them can read. But at that point, I have a chance to go, okay, this is roughly how the pacing of the story works. I'm going to try and read it as the first reader. And again, throw a lot of questions, and then I'm going to try not to mess with them when they've done finished inked pages, because it takes so much damn time. So that, I think, that part of the process. But you do have to find your process, and I found there were things for me that I discovered working on Sailor Twain about size. Like my thumbnails, I discovered if I make them about this big, and it's great because I can do that on the train, I can do it anywhere, and I don't bog down on detail, and I get my story pacing. Then my pencil, I discovered if I do them any bigger than this, I get a little precious or inhibited and stiff. So I found these sizes that work for me, and other people, like Paul Pope, works on these huge pages, and you got to find that, and then I would project my pencil onto a big sheet of paper to do the finished page. So
Time consuming is the number one thing about it. I work about 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it just never ever stops unless I'm out on tour and I get to actually see human beings and talk to them. It's a lot of fun. I actually have a question for some members of the audience. Hey guys, did you finish those books? They read the whole book. They read the whole book. Oh, he read one of them. Excellent. These guys have just been busy reading the whole time. Did you hear us talking at all? Oh, they did. Okay.
They got it all.
All right. Please join me in thanking all of our panelists for being here tonight.